Hi, I'm Dr. Marlene Freeman. Welcome to this presentation. I'm going to be giving you an introduction to the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry. There's a relationship between the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry and the American Society for Clinical Psychopharmacology that we're very excited about and would like to share more information with you about. So I am the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry and a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. I'm also the associate director of the Center for Women's Mental Health at Massachusetts General Hospital and a board member of the ASCP. So as an introduction for the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry, I want to describe a bit about the journal to you, if you're not already familiar, talk about the relationship with ASCP, talk also more in general if you're interested in how to publish, how to figure out where to publish your work and some tips on how to do so, and also to talk about service to the field by means of reviewing and serving on editorial boards. So the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry has an affiliation with the American Society of Clinical Psychopharmacology, and it's really based on a common mission of providing relevant evidence-based information to practicing psychiatrists and clinical researchers and other mental health care providers. So the audience of the journal is primarily composed of clinicians and clinical researchers. And so when we are reviewing papers to potentially accept to the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry, we have that audience in mind. So the focus is on human studies and clinical relevance. We also have an international audience. We have global participation in terms of submission of manuscripts from authors and also readership. And several years ago, we started building specialty sections. So right now, in addition to our more general pool of manuscripts, we have some emphasis specifically on early career psychiatrists, so opportunities for early career psychiatrists to submit their work. We also have an emphasis on geriatric psychiatry, both in terms of Alzheimer's and other dementias, as well as general topics in geriatric psychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry, women's mental health, and topics related to suicide. So in terms of the journal, it's an international peer-reviewed journal that's been in operation for more than 80 years. It's independently owned by Physicians Postgraduate Press Incorporated, which is a small business, which differentiates it from many of the major journals in our field and other fields that are owned by big publishing houses or maybe managed by major big societies through big publishing houses. So it's indexed by PubMed, and it's released in print every 2 months, although its content is published weekly online. It's accredited for CME under the CME Institute, which is run by Physicians Postgraduate Press. It's one of the highest ranked independent clinical journals in our field. So in terms of especially being in a small publishing company, the highest ranked among those, with a 5-year impact factor of 4.8. And its sister journal is the Primary Care Companion for CNS Disorders, which has a little bit of a different audience, which is more primary care based, but also similar in content in terms of clinically relevant based psychiatric and neurologic content. So JCP has a wide reach. Upon surveys of readership by practicing clinicians, it's first in readership among the PubMed indexed psychiatry journals. Over 33,000 psychiatrists and healthcare providers receive the print journal worldwide. There are about 100,000 unique monthly visitors to the JCP website, 57,000 registered users, over 38,000 email requesters, so receive the emails about table of contents and new publications. It also has active Facebook and Twitter accounts and over 44,000 monthly downloads of the publisher's podcast every month. So the online presence, so like many journals and many newspapers, in publishing in general these days, much of the content is now available online. So 100% of the articles are referenced on PubMed. New content is published each week, and CME accredited articles are available from the CME Institute at no cost in full. So we really want clinical researchers and academic authors to consider submitting to the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry. So we know that there are many excellent journals that publish psychiatric relevant material, mental health care related material, but we really want people to think about the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry as a home for their work. So in terms of our priorities for manuscripts, we are always looking for scholarly, systematic reviews and meta-analyses that address timely and clinically relevant topics in psychiatry, especially if there's a novel perspective on the topic. Also, we're excited about original research that focuses on clinically innovative work across therapeutic areas in psychiatry, and also novel methods that would be of interest to clinicians and clinical researchers. So I'm very happy to have the role of editor-in-chief of the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry. I've been doing it for several years. And before me, Alan Gellenberg was the editor-in-chief of the journal, and I was fortunate enough to receive his mentorship and serve as deputy editor and then vice editor-in-chief for many years. Now I want to give you an introduction to our specialty sections and their editors. So Karen Wagner is the editor of the Focus on Child and Adolescent Mental Health section. She is a major leader in the field in child and adolescent psychiatry. She's the professor and chair at the University of Texas Medical Branch in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. Joe Goldberg is the early career psychiatrist specialty editor. He also has a major focus in bipolar disorder and is a leader in that area. And he's a clinical professor of psychiatry at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York. We have a specific editor for the Focus on Psychosis section, and that's Ann Shin. She is the director of clinical research of the Schizophrenia and Bipolar Disorder program at McLean Hospital and an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School. Our editor for the section on Focus on Suicide is Dr. Felipe Cortet. He is he represents our international editorship, and he is a professor at the Academic Hospital of Montpellier in France. We have two editors on geriatric topics. So in the Focus on Geriatric Psychiatry section, we have Dr. Jordan Karp, who's a professor and chair of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Arizona College of Medicine based in Tucson. And his focus is on mood disorders and other disorders across topics in geriatric psychiatry. We also have an editor with a specific focus on Alzheimer's disease and memory disorders in geriatric psychiatry, and that's Gary Small, who's been a major leader in research in that area. He recently moved from UCLA to now he's the chair of psychiatry at Hackensack University Medical Center in New Jersey. And I am the editor of our Focus on Women's Mental Health section, which we are also very pleased to have as part of the journal. We have a very active editorial board, and I just want to mention, we've had editorial board members who have served for many years. We have requirements for our editorial board members to provide a certain degree of service. So it's not just an honorary position. So our editorial board members are very active. And, for more junior colleagues, I just want to mention that serving on an editorial board can be not only a very rewarding role in terms of service to the field, but also very important in terms of demonstrating scholarship and contributions to the field, and can help in terms of promotion in your career. So I'm often asked, how do I serve on an editorial board? And part of the way to get to an editorial board membership is to provide service to the journal, which we'll talk about. But we're always looking for new editorial board members. We're always looking to diversify. And so this is something important to keep in mind. In terms of the relationship between ASCP and JCP, we have the ASCP Corner, which is a long-standing section of the journal. The editor is Les Citrom, and it's basically a place in the journal. It always appears in print with a very clinically relevant topic, savvy authorship, and it's generally a brief piece on a clinically relevant topic, usually very timely and very helpful to practicing clinicians. Also, members of ASCP receive a free subscription to JCP electronically. Now, for submitting a manuscript to JCP, an individual would go to the website for more information about preparing a manuscript and the different types of manuscripts. We receive approximately 450 submissions per year, which is generally growing based on our international readership and authorship. The acceptance rate is approximately 20%. Average time from submission to a first decision is about 11 days, although that can vary depending on the speed of reviewers. The time to submission to acceptance is on average 4.4 months, and acceptance to publication between 4 and 6 months, although that's decreasing by a lot with electronic publication. So I wanted to just mention being a peer reviewer in that role. And Dr. Joe Goldberg will be addressing this in more detail in another talk on this series. But being a peer review is one of the most significant roles in which we can serve not only the journals that move our field forward, but also to not only help clinicians have an excellent evidence-based field to work from, but also ultimately peer review serves our patients. It makes sure that the quality of papers that are published are of high quality and a good fit with the journal. So we have more information on the website if you're interested, and please keep an eye out for Joe Goldberg's more thorough talk on this topic. Also, importantly, for peer review, reviewers can get CME credit for the work that they do peer reviewing. So questions about publishing. This is really directed towards early career psychiatrists, although it may be helpful more broadly. But you want to keep in mind, if you have a paper that you want to publish, who is your audience? What is your timeline? And you want to really aim for the best journal possible for your work, but be realistic about it also. So, that might depend on, how novel the work is, how the audience, how specialized the audience might be for the particular paper. So for example, the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry has a very broad general audience, although we do also publish more specialized papers as demonstrated by our specialty sections. And when you think about the journal, you can think about who you're trying to reach. Are you trying to reach practicing clinicians? Are you basically trying to reach researchers? Is it more basic science, translational science, clinical work? So the focus of the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry is really clinical as stated. And some tips from the editor that I'd like to share is, it's really important to be a good citizen. Although we have, global representation among our readers and our authors and our reviewers, it really is a small world. So, a lot of the same people who submit papers are also active reviewers, editorial board members, members of ASCP. So there's a lot of overlap in our communities. And it's important to build relationships. And so in terms of building relationships with colleagues, mentors, editors, potential reviewers of your papers. And when you're submitting a journal, you want to list reviewers that can potentially review your paper who not only have the expertise, but also who you think are likely to accept the role of reviewer. So, it's no surprise that many of the individuals who are called upon to review are extremely busy individuals. There's a limit to how much work that they can do, but we call on a lot of the experts in the field, and many are so generous with their time. But I would say that one of the biggest challenges as an editor is to find reviewers who have the expertise and accept the invitation to review, and review in a timely manner so that we can turn around the decision on the paper quickly. So also very important about peer review is peer reviewers can give extremely helpful comments back to the authors about how to improve the paper. So this is one of the most important things. So if you're interested in serving as a reviewer, please let us know. We do require a track record of reviewing prior to considering individuals to serve on the editorial board. So that's also an important step. And serving as a peer reviewer also is something that individuals can add to their CVs as they build their CVs. Now, as authors submit to the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry and any journals, unfortunately, rejection is part of the game. So it's not unusual to have papers rejected. There are many different reasons why they might be. One might be fit with the journal. So for example, we get papers that may not be a good fit in terms of the clinically oriented readership. There may be also other papers in the pipeline that have a lot of overlap at a particular journal. So it might not be related to the specific fit, but it might be that there are other papers that are in process with the journal that are too similar. It's really important to take into account the reviewer feedback. So whether you're revising the paper for that journal or submitting somewhere else, because the reviewers generally have a lot of expertise and have spent a lot of time on your paper. And so you want to make sure that you take into account their feedback. And the other thing with any rejection, be it submissions to a journal or to a grant, is not to take the feedback personally. So to try and take it as constructive criticism, and also keep in mind that there are other variables other than the quality of your work. So in terms of building relationships with editors and editorial boards, this is some comments aimed specifically to early career psychiatrists. It's important to introduce yourself if you're interested in serving as a reviewer, potentially in the future on an editorial board. Please introduce yourself to editors at meetings or by email, taking the opportunity to let them know that you're interested in reviewing and being part of the active community of peer reviewers and authors. So another thing is to accept invitations to review. So again, one of the biggest struggles we have as editors is to find reviewers with the appropriate expertise who take on the role. And we're always so grateful for that. And it's an anonymous role in large part, although we do acknowledge that, and it is something that you can put on your CV. We appreciate that it's very much anonymous work that can take a lot of time. So many individuals also would like to serve on editorial boards. And so again, building those relationships as a reviewer and in communication with the journal as an active author, if you're writing papers, are very important. And we really want to see your work. So please consider sending Journal of Clinical Psychiatry your best clinically relevant work. We're always grateful for those papers. So how to contribute the most as a reviewer, again, we'll have a more detailed talk by Dr. Joe Goldberg. But in terms of submitting a review, there are some caveats on what's most helpful. One is to structure your review. So it's very helpful for the editor to receive your concise summary, even if it's just 2 or 3 sentences to summarize the paper. Also, it's important to hear from you what you think are the paper's strengths and the paper's limitations, and then specific recommendations for the authors for improvement. If you think that there are sort of quote unquote fatal flaws to the paper, so problems with design, anything that you think would invalidate the paper, to make sure you mention that as well, not only in comments to authors, but in comments to the editor. And then also not to be shy about recommending the disposition that you think the paper should have. So do you think the paper should be revised with the idea that ultimately with revision it'll be accepted? Or do you think really that the paper should be rejected? Because what we really want is we want decisiveness. So if you really think that the paper is not good enough for JCP, as editors at JCP, we really want to hear that. And it could be based on fit, it could be based on quality, but that's very important for us to know. Also, as an editor, I would say, please don't spend a lot of time on a paper that you really don't think would be appropriate for the journal. So it's very helpful to hear a decision like that. And also for authors to have a rationale on why we potentially would not take their paper, but we also don't need reviewers to spend a lot of time on a paper that they don't think will ultimately be a good fit for the journal. So on that note, I'd like to thank you for your attention. It's been a pleasure giving you an overview of the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry. And we're very proud of the collaborative relationship between the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry and the ASCP. So thank you very much.